sad sound. A few leaves came rustling down the rewind that the outside autumn was coming on. Their feet ruffled among the dead leaves of countless other autumns that drifted over the banks of the path from the deep red carpets of the forest. Still, Bumper slept and they grew very weary. At times, they heard disquieting laughter. Sometimes there was singing in the distance, too. The laughter was the laughter of fair voices, not of goblins, and the singing was beautiful, but it sounded eerie and strange, and they were not comforted. Rather, they hurried on from those parts with what strength they had left. 2 days later, they found their path going downwards, and before long they were in a valley filled almost entirely with a mighty growth of oaks. "Is there no end of this accursed forest?" said Thorin. "Somebody must climb a tree and see if it get any head above the roof and have a look around. The only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path." Of course somebody meant Bilbo. They chose him because to be any climber must be a good head above the topmost leaves, and so he must be light enough for the highest and slenderest branches to bear him. Poor Mr. Baggins had never had practice in climbing trees, but they hoisted him up into the lowest branches of an enormous oak that grew right out of the path, and up he had to go as best as he could. He pushed his way through the tangled twigs with many a slap in the eye. He was greened and grimed from the old bark of the greater boughs. More than once he slipped and caught himself just in time, and at last, after a dreadful struggle in a difficult place where he seemed to be no convenient branches at all, he got near at the top. All the time, he was wondering whether there were any spiders in the tree, and how he's going to get down again, except by falling. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of trees, and then he found spiders all right. There were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarf shouting up from the bottom below, but he could not answer, not only hold on to his blink. The sun was shining brightly, and it was a long while after before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all round him a sea of dark green, ruffled here, there by the breeze. They were everywhere, hundreds of butterflies. I expect they were kind of a purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the tops of oak woods. These were not purple at all. They were a dark, velvety black, without any markings to be seen. He looked at the black emperors for a long time, and enjoyed the feel of the breeze in his hair on his face. But at length the cries of the dwarves, who were now simply stamping and impatient down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. Gaze as much as he might, he could see no end to the trees and the leaves in any direction. His heart, that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the feel of the wind, sank back into his toes. There was no food to go back to down and below. Actually, as I have told you, they were not far off the edge of the forest, and if Bilbo had the sense to see it, the tree that he had climbed through was tall in itself, was standing near the bottom of a wide valley, so that from its top the tree seemed to swell up and round up like the edges of a great bowl, and they could not expect to see how far the forest lasted. Still, he did not see this, and he climbed down, full of despair. He got to the bottom again at last, scratched, hot, and miserable. He could not see anything in the gloom below when he got there. His report soon made the others as miserable as he. The forest goes on forever and ever and ever, in all directions. Whatever shall we do? And what is the use of sending a hobbit? They cried, as if it was his fault. They did not care tuppence about the butterflies, and they were only made more angry when he told them of the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb up and feel. That night, they ate their very last scraps and crumbs of food, and the next morning when they woke, the first thing they noticed was that they were still gnawingly hungry, and the next thing was that it was raining, and that here that there drip of the dropping of the heavily on the forest floor. scrap of comfort. There was unexpectedly from Bumbar. He woke up suddenly and sat up, scratching his head. He could not make out where he was, or why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May morning long ago. The last thing that he remembered was the party at the Hobbit's house, and he had great difficulty in making him believe their tale of all the adventures that he had since. When he heard there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he was very weak and wobbly in the legs. "Why ever did I wake up?" he cried. "I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed of walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and laughs singing from the branches and fires burning on the ground. And there was a great feast going on forever, and Woodland King was there with a crown of leaves, and there was merry singing, and I could not count or describe the things there were to eat and drink." "You would need to try," said Thorin. "In fact, you can't talk about something else. You better be silent. We're quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to that idiotic dreams in the forest. You're no joke to carry even after weeks of shortcomings." There was nothing now to be done but to tighten the belts around their empty stomachs and hoist their empty sacks and packs, and trudge along the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and die of starvation. This they did all the end, going very slowly and warily, while Bumbar kept on wailing that his legs would not carry him, and he wanted to lie down and sleep. "No, you don't," they said. "Let your legs take their share. We've carried you far enough." All the time, he suddenly refused to go a step further and flung himself on the ground. "Go on, if you must," he said. I'm just gonna lie here and sleep and dream of food if I can't get any other way. I hope I never wake up again." At that very moment, Balin, who was way ahead, called out, "What was that? I thought I saw a twinkle of light in the forest." They all looked, and longish way off, it seemed, they saw a red twinkle in the dark, then another and another spring out beside it. Even Bumbar got up, and they hurried along them, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them, and to the left of the path, and when at lastly drawn level with it, it seemed plain like torches and fires were burning under the trees, but a good way off their track. "It looks like as if my dreams were coming true," gasped Bumbar, puffing up behind. He wanted to rush straight off into the wood after the lights, but the others remembered only too well the warnings of the wizard and Born. "A feast would be no good if we never got back alive from it," said Thorin. "But without a feast, we shan't remain alive much longer anyway," said Bumbar and Bilbo. Heartily agreeing with him, they argued about it backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed at length to send out a couple of spies to creep near the lights and find out more about them. But they could not agree on who was to be sent. No one seemed anxious to run to the chance of being lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, in spite of warnings, hunger decided them, because Bumbar kept on describing all good things that were to be being eaten, according to the dream, in the woodland feast. So they all left the path and plunged in the forest together. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered around the trunks and looked into clearing where some trees had been felled and the ground leveled. There were many people there, elvish-looking folk all dressed in green and brown and sitting on thong rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in the midst, and there were torches fastened to some of these trees around them. But most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of roast meats was so enchanting that without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forward into the ring with one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire, and it went up in rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in complete lightless dark, and they could not find one another. Not for a long time, at any rate. After blundering practically in the gloom, falling over logs, bumping crash into trees, and shouting and calling till they must have waked settle down for the night where they were. They did not dare to search on the ground for scraps of food for fear of becoming separated again, for they did not know become lying long. Bilbo was only getting drowsy when Dory, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a loud whisper, "The lights are coming on again over there," and there was more than ever. Up they all jumped. Their sure's not enough, not far away from the scores of twinkling lights. They heard the voices and laughter quite plainly. They crept slowly then, in a single line, even touching the back of one front. When they got near, Thorin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one stir from hiding till I say. I shall send Mr. Baggins alone first to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him, and anyway, I hope they won't do anything nasty to him." When they got to the edge of the circle of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on his ring, he stumbled forward into the blaze of fire and torches. It was no good. Out went the lights again, and complete darkness fell. If it had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time. They simply could not find the Hobbit. Every time they counted themselves and made 13, they shouted and called, "Bilbo Baggins, Hobbit, you dreaded Hobbit, Hobbit, confusion, you, where are you?" And other things of that sort, but there was no answer. They were giving up hope when Dory stumbled across, by sheer luck. In the dark, he fell over when he thought it was a log. He was found. It was the Hobbit curled up fast asleep. It took a deal of shaking to wake him up, and when he was awake, he was not pleased at all. "I was having a lovely dream," he grumbled, "all about having a most gorgeous dinner. Good heavens, he has gone like Bumbar. Don't tell us about those dreams. Dream dinners aren't any good. We can't share them. They are the best I'm likely to get in this beastly pace," he muttered as he lay down beside the dwarves and tried to go back to sleep and find his dream again. But that was not the last of the lights in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Gilly was watching them, came and roused them all again. There's a regular blaze of light begun, not far away. Hundreds of torches and many fires must be taken suddenly by magic, and hark the singing and the harps. After lying and listening for a while, they found they could not resist the desire to go nearer and try once more to get help. Up they got up again, and this time the result was disastrous. The feast that they now saw was greater and more magnificent than before, and at the head of a long time of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves upon his gold hair, very much as Bilbo described. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping, and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinted on their collars, and their belts, and their faces. Their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Thorin into their midst. Dead silence fell into the middle of the world. One went, all lights. The fires leaped in black smokes, ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarves, and the woodland was filled again with the clamor and their cries. Bilbo found himself running round and around, and calling Dory, Nori, Ori, Oin, Gloin, Billy, Gilly, Bumbar, Biffer, Bofer, Dwalin, Balin, Thorin, Oakenshield, while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all around him. But the cries of the others got steadily further and fainter, until after a while it seemed to him that they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance. All noise at last died away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. That was one of the most miserable moments, but he soon made up his mind, and it was no good trying to do anything till the day came with some light, and quite useless of go blundering about tiring himself, with no hope of any breakfast to revive him. So he sat himself down, with his back on the tree, not to the last time of him thinking of his far distant hobbit hole, with his beautiful paint trees. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter, when he felt someone touch was dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He only saw things with his eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs, and it struggled to its wind abdominal threads round and round him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not be able to move. As it was, he had a desperate before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands. It was trying to poison him, to keep him quiet, as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword and he drew it out. Then the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. And that it was his turn to attack. The spider evidently was not used to things that carried such strings, and their sides, or whatever, ate away quicker. Bilbo came at before could disappear, struck it with the sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad and leaped and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks until he killed it with another stroke. And then he fell down and remembered nothing more for a long while. There was a usual dim gray light in the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay down beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow the killing out of the giant all alone by himself in the dark without the help of the wizard or the dwarves or anyone else made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt a different person, much fiercer and bolder, in spite of any empty stomach, as he wiped his sword on the grass and put it back into its sheath. "I will give you a name," he said to it. "I shall call you Sting." After that, he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, but obviously he had first of all to look to his friends, who were not luckily far off, unless they were made prisoners by the elves, or worse things. Bilbo felt it was unsafe to shout, and he stood a long while, wondering in what direction the path lay, and what direction he should go first to look for the dwarves. "Oh, why did we not remember Born's advice and Gandalf's?" he lamented. "What a mess we're in now. I only wish it was we. It is horrible being all alone." In the end, he made a good guess as he could at the direction from which the cries for help he had gone to the night, and by luck, he was born with a good shape of it. He guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along as cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever as quietness, especially in woods. As I've told you, also Bilbo had slipped on his ring before he started. That is why the spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. He had picked his way stealthily for some distance when he noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him, black even for that forest, like a pitch patch of midnight that had never been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw it was made by spider webs, behind over entangled with another. Suddenly he saw, too, that there was spiders huge and horrible sitting in the branches above him, and ring or no ring, he trembled with fear lest they should discover him. Standing behind a tree, he watched a group of them for some time. Then in the silence and stillness of the wood, he realized that these lonesome creatures were speaking to one another. Their voices were sort of him creaking and hissing, but he could make out many of the words they said. They were talking about the dwarves. "It was a sharp struggle, but worth it," said one. "What nasty thick skins they have, to be sure, but I'll wager there's good juice inside them. Aye, they'll make fine eating when they're hung a bit," said another. "Don't hang 'em too long," said a third. "They're not as fat as they might be. Been feeding none too well for late, I guess. Kill 'em, I say," hissed a fourth. "Kill 'em now and hang 'em dead for a while." "They're dead now, I'll warrant," said the first. "That they are not. I saw one struggling just now, just coming round again, I should say, after a beautiful sleep, I'll show you." With that, one of the fat spiders ran along a rope till came to a dozen bundles hanging in row. Bilbo was horrified, now that he noticed them for the first time dangling in the shadows, to see a dwarf's foot sticking out of the bottoms of some of the bundles, or here there's a tip of the nose of a beard of a hood. To the fattest of these bundles of the spider, it was poor old Bumper, I'll bet, thought Bilbo. straight hard. There was life left in Bumper still. There was noise like the kicking of a flabby football, and the enraged spider fell off the branch, only catching himself with his own thread just in time. The others laughed. "You were quite right," they said. "The meat's alive and cooking." "I'll soon put an end to that," hissed the angry spider, climbing back up into the branch. Bilbo saw that moment had come. With much something to do, he could not get up out of his perch. He had nothing to shoot but see his place, stones lying, appearing now dry like a little watercourse. Bilbo was pretty far shot with a stone. It did not take him long to find a nice, smooth, egg-shaped one, fitting his hand closely. As a boy, he used to practice throwing stones at things. There, in no time, while he was picking up stones, the spider had reached Bumper, and soon he would have been dead. At that moment, Bilbo threw. The stone struck the spider plunk in the head, and it dropped senseless off the tree, flopped to the ground with its legs curled up. The next stone went whizzing through a big web, snapping its cords and taking out the spider sitting in the middle of it. Whack! Dead. After that, there was a deal of commotion in the spider colony, and they forgot the dwarves for a bit. I can tell you, they could not see Bilbo, but they could get a guess in the direction from which the stones were coming. As quick as lightning, they came running and swinging towards the Hobbit, flinging out their long threads in all directions, till the air seemed full of waving snars. Bilbo, however, soon slipped away to a different place. The idea came to him, led to the furious spiders further and further away from the doors as he could, to make them curious, excited, and angry all at once. When about 50 had gone off to the place where he had stood, he threw some stones at these, and at others they had stopped behind, then dancing among the trees, had begun to sing a song to infuriate them and to bring them all after him. And after that, the dwarves heard his voice. Not very good, perhaps, but then you remember that he had to make it himself on the spur of a very awkward moment. If he had did as he sang, he threw some more stones and stamped. Practically all the spiders in the place came after him. Some dropped to the ground, others raced along the branches, swung from tree to tree. Off Bilbo scuttled to a fresh place, but several of the spiders had turned down. He caught a thick fence of them. Standing now in the middle of the hunting and spinning and specks, Bilbo plucked up his courage and began a new song. With that, he turned and found that the last space between two tall trees had been closed with a web, but luckily not a proper web, only great strands of double-thick spider rope run hastily backwards and forwards from trunk to trunk. Out came his little sword. He slashed the threads to pieces and went off singing. The spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was, and once the whole lot came hurrying after the Hobbit along the branches, hairy legs waving, nippers and snippers, and snapping eyes popping full of forth and rage. They followed him into the forest until Bilbo had gone as far as he dared. Then, quieter than a mouse, he stole back. He had precious time, little time, he knew, before the spiders were disgusted and came back to their trees where the dwarves were hung. In the meantime, he had to rescue them. The worst part of the job was getting up on the long branch where the bundles were dangling. I didn't suppose he would have managed it if a spider had not luckily left a rope hanging down with its help. Though it stuck to his hand and hurt him, he scrambled up only to meet an old, slow, wicked, fat-bodied spider who had remained behind the guard of prisoners. It had thought of starting to feast while the others were away, but Mr. Baggins was in a hurry, and before the spider knew what was happening, it fell a sting and rolled off the branch dead. Bilbo's next job was to lose a dwarf. What was he to do? If he cut the string which hung up, the wretched dwarf would thump to the branch, he reached the first bundle. Feeling Gilly, he thought by the tip of a blue head sticking out. Most likely Philly, he thought by the tip of a nose poking at the threads. He managed by leaning over to cut most of the steady, sticky threads and bound him and round him, and then sure enough, it was a kick and struggle. Most of Philly emerged. I'm afraid Bilbo actually laughed at the sight of him jerking his stiff arms and legs. In that way, none of them were better off than Philly, and some of them were sometimes useful, you see, and some had been more poisoned. In this way they rescued Gilly, Biffer, Bofer, Dory, and Lori. Poor old Bumper was exhausted. He was the fattest, and he had been consistently pinched and poked, and they just rolled off the branch, fell plop on the ground, fortunately on the leaves. Bilbo immediately went on to the end of the bunch, nearest the tree, and kept back those up crawled up. He had taken his ring when he rescued Philly and forgot to put it on again, so now they all began to splutter and hiss. Now we see you, you nasty creature. We will eat you and leave your bones and your skin hanging on a tree. Suddenly, Bilbo noticed that some of the spiders had gathered round old Bumper on the floor. He gave a shout and slashed the spiders. Come down, he shouted to the dwarves on the branch. Don't stay up there netted. For he saw spiders swarming all the neighboring trees, crawling around the boughs above the heads of the dwarves. Down the dwarves scrambled or jumped or dropped 11 all a heap, most of them shaky, little use of their legs. Then battle began. Some of the dwarves had knives, some had sticks. Bilbo had the elvish dagger. Again and again, the spiders were beaten off and many of them killed. But it could not go for long. Bilbo was nearly tired out. Only 4 of the dwarves were able to stand firmly, and soon they would be all overpowered. In the end, Bilbo could think of no plan. I'm going to disappear, he said. I shall draw swords the spiders off if I can. You must keep together and make to the opposite direction. To the left there. That is more or less the way towards the place where he saw the elf fires. It was difficult to get them to understand. He suddenly slipped on his ring. In the great astonishment, the dwarves, he vanished. Soon there came the sound of a lazy lob and attercop from among the trees. They stopped advancing. Attercop made them so angry they lost their wits. Then Balin, who had grasped Bilbo's plan better than the rest, led an attack. The dwarves huddled together in a knot, and sending a shower of stones, they drove at the spiders on the left and burst through the ring. Away behind them, shouting and singing suddenly stopped, hoping desperately that Bilbo had not been caught by the dwarves. Not fast enough. They were sick and weary. Things were looking pretty bad when suddenly Bilbo reappeared and charged into the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side. Go on, he shouted. I will do the stinging. And he did. He darted backwards, forward, slashing spiders. The spiders were swelled with rage and spluttered and hissed out horrible curses. So curse they would. Their prey moved slowly but steadily back. The dwarves then noticed that they had come to the edge of a ring where the elves' fires had been. But it seemed it was a good magic lingered in such spots which the spiders did not like. At any rate, here the light was greener, the boughs less thick and threatening, and they had a chance to rest and draw breath. There they lay, some puffing and panting, but very soon they began to ask questions. spiders had stopped talking and shut their eyes. He kept muttering to himself, chuckling to himself. Call in while I am blessed. So, that's how he sneaked past me, is it? Now I know. Just crept quietly along, Mr. Baggins. Buttons all over the doorstep. Good old Bilbo. Bilbo, Bilbo, Bilbo. And then he fell asleep. All of a sudden, Dwalin opened an eye and looked round at them. Where's Thorin? It was a terrible shock, of course. There was 13 of them, 12 dwarves and the Hobbit. Where indeed was Thorin? They wondered what evil fate had befallen him, magic or dark monsters. Then they dropped off one by one into uncomfortable sleep full of horrible dreams, as evening wore black tonight. We must leave from the peasant too sick. Set guards to take turns at watching. Thorin had been caught much faster than they had. You remember Bilbo falling like a log into sleep as he slept into a circle of light. The next time it had been Thorin who stepped forward as the lights went out like stone enchanted. All the noise of the dwarves lost in the night. Their cries and the spiders caught them and befun them, and sound the battles the next day had passed over. Then the wood elves had come to him and bound him and carried him away. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. These are not wicked folk. They had fought in distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were very wary. They differed from the high elves of the west, and they were the most dangerous and less wise, for most of them were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to Faerie in the west. They're the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went on, lived for ages and grew fairer and wiser and more learned. They invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things before some came into the wide world. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars. They wandered in the great forest, they grew tall in lands, and they are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt, or to ride and to run. Still, elves they will remain, that is, good people. In a great cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood on its eastern side, there lived at this time their greatest king. Before his huge doors in stone a river ran out of the heights of the forest, and flown on in the marshes of feet, wooded elves. This is a great cave, from which the countless smaller ones opted, open on every side. The beeches were their favorite of the trees. The king's cave was his palace, and the strong place of this treasure in the fortress of peoples against their enemies. It was also the dungeons of his prisoners, so the cave they dragged Thorin, not too gently, and thought he was his enemy. In ancient days, they had wars with some dwarves. It was only fair to say that dwarves had given a different account. If the elf king had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially silver and white gems. Consequently, Thorin was angry at their treatment of him. They took their spell out of him, and he came to his senses. And also he was determined that no word of gold or jewels should be dragged out of him. The king looked sternly on Thorin. Why do you and your folk 3 times try to attack my people at their merrymaking? Asked the king. We did not attack them. We came to beg because we're starving. Where are your friends now? What are they doing? I don't know, but I expect starving in the forest. What were you doing in the forest? Looking for food and drink because we are starving. But what brought you into the forest at all? Asked the king angrily, and that Thorin shut his mouth and would not say another word. Very well. Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth, even if he waits 100 years. Then the elves put thongs on him and shut him into the inmost caves with strong wooden doors. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, but not very fine, for wood elves were not goblins and were reasonably well behaved, even for their worst enemies. When they captured him, now, the giant spiders were the only living things that they had no mercy upon. There in the king's dungeon poor Thorin lay, and was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs in the next chapter and the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. We will continue the next chapter together to see where our adventurers are and if they will find Thorin. Thank you for reading, and I hope you've had a relaxing, restful